Sarah Miller stepped off the plane in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The hot African air hit her face as she walked down the stairs onto the tarmac. She carried only one bag, a simple approach for someone who claimed to be here on a humanitarian mission. "Passport please," said the customs officer. Sarah handed over her American passport with a practiced smile. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked, not returning her smile. "I'm with Global Health Initiative. We're bringing medical supplies to rural communities," Sarah said confidently. She handed him a letter with an official-looking logo. The officer studied her face for a moment longer than necessary before stamping her passport. "Welcome to Burkina Faso." Outside the airport, a driver waited with a sign bearing her name. As they drove through the busy streets of Ouagadougou, Sarah observed everything: the market vendors, the military checkpoints, the blend of traditional and modern buildings. "First time in Burkina Faso?" the driver asked, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Sarah replied. "But I've worked in Mali and Niger before. Similar health projects." The driver nodded but said nothing more. Sarah's phone vibrated in her pocket. A text message read, "Confirmed. Meeting tomorrow. 1400 hours." Her real mission was beginning. The Global Health Initiative was real enough, but Sarah's role within it was not what she claimed. After working in intelligence for 15 years, she knew how to blend in. The medical supplies would arrive. Clinics would receive help. But Sarah's true assignment came from much higher up the chain of command. The military government of Burkina Faso, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, had been making moves that worried Washington. After taking power in a coup, Traoré had expelled French troops and turned toward Russia for military support. Sarah's job was to gather intelligence on Russian operations and Traoré's plans. The car stopped at a modest hotel. "We're here," the driver announced. Sarah checked into her room and immediately swept it for bugs, a habit from years of fieldwork. Finding nothing, she unpacked her specialized equipment disguised as ordinary items: a camera pen, a phone with encrypted communications, and pills that could make someone talkative without them realizing. She opened her laptop and reviewed her cover story once more. The Global Health Initiative had established a presence in Burkina Faso 2 years ago. Their work was legitimate, making them a perfect cover. Her credentials showed she specialized in supply chain logistics for medical equipment, boring enough to avoid scrutiny but useful enough to justify her movements around the country. Sarah had done this many times before in other countries. Get in, gather intelligence, get out. Simple. What she didn't know was that Captain Ibrahim Traoré had already been alerted to the possibility of Western intelligence agents entering under humanitarian cover. After severing ties with former colonial power France, he had established a new security apparatus, trained by Russian advisors from the Wagner Group. As Sarah prepared for bed, a report with her photograph was already on Traoré's desk. A note attached read, "Possible CIA operative. Arrived today. Cover, Global Health Initiative." Traoré studied her picture. "Let her move freely," he told his security chief. "We'll watch and learn before we act. I want to know who she contacts and what she's really after." The security chief nodded. "We've placed someone at the NGO who will work closely with her." "Good," Traoré said. "If she's truly here to help, she has nothing to fear. But if she's a spy..." He left the sentence unfinished. The game had begun, but only one side knew they were playing. Sarah's first week in Burkina Faso went exactly as planned. She established her presence at the Global Health Initiative office, met her colleagues, and began coordinating medical supply deliveries to clinics outside the capital. Her assigned partner from the local staff was Amadou Diallo, a soft-spoken man who knew the country's healthcare system inside out. He seemed genuinely dedicated to improving healthcare access in rural areas. "Tomorrow we'll visit the clinic in Bobo de Lasso," Amadou told her as they finished work on Friday. "It's our second largest city, about a 5-hour drive." "Perfect," Sarah replied. Bobo de Lasso was also home to a military base where Russian advisors were reportedly training Burkinabe soldiers. That evening, Sarah met her contact at a small cafe. Martin was officially a trade attaché at the American embassy but served the same agency as Sarah. "Any problems so far?" Martin asked, stirring his coffee. "None. My cover is solid," Sarah said. "I'm headed to Bobo de Lasso tomorrow." "Good. Our satellite picked up increased activity at the base there. We need to know what kind of training the Russians are providing and what weapons are being delivered." Sarah nodded. "I'll get as close as I can. The clinic we're visiting isn't far from the base." "Be careful," Martin warned. "Traoré's government is paranoid about Western spies. They've detained 3 French nationals in the past month on espionage charges." "I'll stick to my cover," Sarah assured him. What Sarah didn't notice was the waiter who lingered too long near their table, or the woman at the next table who never turned a page of her book. The next morning, Sarah and Amadou set off for Bobo Dioulasso in a white SUV with a Global Health Initiative logo. The journey gave Sarah time to build rapport with Amadou. "How long have you worked with Global Health?" she asked. 3 years, he answered. Before the coup, it was difficult to get supplies to certain regions because of security issues. Ironically, things have improved since Captain Traoré took power. Really? I heard the situation became more unstable, Sarah probed. Amadou gave her a sideways glance. That's what Western media says. But for ordinary people, security has improved in many areas. The Russians brought military equipment that our army never had before. Sarah nodded noncommittally. I'm just here for the healthcare work. Politics isn't my concern. Everyone says that, Amadou replied with a slight smile. Yet politics affects everything we do. When they arrived in Bobo Dioulasso, they went straight to the clinic. Sarah took photos of the facility, legitimate documentation for her cover job. But her specialized camera pen also captured high-resolution images that would be analyzed later for intelligence purposes. I'd like to take a walk before dinner, Sarah told Amadou after they checked into their hotel. Get a feel for the city. Of course. Would you like me to come with you? No need. I enjoy exploring on my own. Sarah walked through the city, eventually making her way toward the military base. She couldn't get too close without arousing suspicion, but even from a distance she could see new construction and vehicles with Russian markings. She took several photos using her special pen, careful to appear as just another tourist capturing the scenery. As she turned to leave, she noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street. The same vehicle appeared again 2 blocks later. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She was being followed. Had her cover been blown already? Or was this routine surveillance of foreigners? She ducked into a crowded market, weaving through stalls of colorful fabrics and local crafts. After several minutes of evasive maneuvers, she was confident she'd lost her tail. Back at the hotel, Amadou was waiting in the lobby. How was your walk? He asked pleasantly. Enlightening, Sarah replied, studying his face for any sign that he knew about her detour near the military base. Tomorrow will be busy, he said. Captain Traoré himself is visiting the city. There's a public address in the main square. Sarah's pulse quickened. This was an unexpected opportunity. Will we be able to attend? Of course, Amadou smiled. I thought you weren't interested in politics? It's not every day you get to see a national leader in person, Sarah said smoothly. That night, Sarah encrypted and transmitted the photos she'd taken near the base. She also reported the surveillance she'd noticed. The response from headquarters was immediate. Proceed with caution. Traoré's visit equals high security. Look, don't touch. What Sarah didn't know was that her room had been swept while she was out walking. The security team had found nothing incriminating, she was too careful for that, but they had placed their own listening devices. In his temporary quarters at the military base, Captain Traoré reviewed the day's security reports. The American woman went near the base today, his security chief reported. And tomorrow she wants to see me speak, Traoré said. Let's give her something to report back. Operation Desert Lion begins next week. Let's make sure she learns just enough about it to keep her handlers interested. And then? Then we'll see if she takes the bait, Traoré smiled. The game is just beginning. The main square of Bobo Dioulasso was packed with people by the time Sarah and Amadou arrived. Red, green and yellow flags, the colors of Burkina Faso, waved throughout the crowd. A stage had been set up with armed soldiers creating a perimeter around it. There are a lot of soldiers, Sarah observed casually. Captain Traoré is a military man, Amadou replied. And after 2 assassination attempts last year, security is tight. Sarah hadn't known about any assassination attempts. Either they'd been kept quiet, or Amadou was feeding her information to gauge her reaction. I hadn't heard about that, she said carefully. Not everything makes international news, Amadou said. Especially when it contradicts the narrative about our country. Before Sarah could respond, the crowd erupted in cheers. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the stage, dressed in military fatigues with a red beret. At 34 years old, he was one of the youngest leaders in Africa, having seized power at 32. Traoré approached the microphone with confidence. His speech began in French, then switched to one of the local languages. Sarah understood enough French to follow along. Burkina Faso will no longer be a playground for foreign powers, Traoré declared. For too long, our resources were exploited while our people suffered. Those days are over. The crowd cheered wildly. Some nations claim to be our friends but send spies among us, he continued. They hide behind humanitarian work while gathering intelligence. They smile to our faces while plotting against our sovereignty. Sarah felt a chill. Was this a coincidence or was he speaking directly to her? But we have new friends who respect our independence, Traoré continued. Next week, we begin Operation Desert Lion, joint military exercises with our Russian allies that will strengthen our ability to secure our borders and defeat the terrorists who threaten our people. Sarah made a mental note of this information. Operation Desert Lion, exactly the kind of intelligence she was sent to gather. Our enemies should know that Burkina Faso is watching. We see their spies. We know their games. And we will protect our nation by any means necessary. As Traoré finished his speech, Sarah noticed several men in plain clothes scanning the crowd. One seemed to look directly at her before speaking into a radio. He's very passionate, Sarah commented to Amadou. Captain Traoré gave up a comfortable life to fight for our country, Amadou replied. He believes in what he's doing. And what about the Russian alliance? Do people support that? Amadou gave her a long look. The French were here for decades. What did they do for us? At least the Russians don't pretend to be saviors while taking our gold. As they left the square, Sarah spotted the black SUV again, parked at a distance. She was definitely being watched. That evening, Sarah needed to transmit the information about Operation Desert Lion. But with surveillance likely, she had to be careful. She waited until midnight, then used her specialized equipment to send an encrypted message through satellite channels that would be difficult to trace. The transmission lasted only seconds. The response came back quickly. Info received. I value. Get specifics on Operation Desert Lion. Troop numbers, equipment, objectives. Priority 1. Sarah deleted the message immediately. She knew she needed to get closer to someone with knowledge of the operation. Based on her observations at the speech, one of Traoré's advisors had been watching her with particular interest, a tall man who stood just behind the captain throughout the address. The next morning, Amadou informed her of a change in plans. There's a reception tonight at the governor's residence. Global Health Initiative has been invited. As our logistics expert, you should attend. This was unusual. NGO staff weren't typically invited to government functions. Will Captain Traoré be there? Sarah asked. Yes, along with his key advisors and some Russian officials, Amadou replied. It's a good opportunity for our organization to build relationships with decision-makers. It was also the perfect opportunity for Sarah to gather intelligence. But the timing felt suspicious. Right after Traoré's comments about spies, she was being invited into the inner circle? I didn't bring anything formal to wear, Sarah said, testing Amadou's response. That's been taken care of, he smiled. The local office sent a dress for you this morning. It should be at the hotel reception. Sure enough, when they returned to the hotel, a package waited for Sarah. Inside was an elegant but modest dress in a traditional Burkinabe fabric. Sarah was now certain she was being played. The question was, did they suspect her specifically, or was this a general counterintelligence operation to identify potential spies? Either way, she couldn't refuse the invitation without raising suspicion. She would attend, maintain her cover, and be extremely careful about what she said and to whom. What Sarah didn't realize was that every word she had spoken in her hotel room had been recorded. Her midnight transmission had been detected, though not decoded. And Captain Traoré himself had specifically requested her presence at the reception. She took the bait, Traoré told his security chief. Now let's see what she does with the information about Desert Lion. Should we arrest her tonight? The security chief asked. No, Traoré replied. First, I want to meet this American who thinks she can spy on us so easily. Let's see what kind of woman believes she can come to help Africa while serving her masters in Washington. The governor's residence was a colonial-era building with high ceilings and marble floors. Security was tight, armed guards checked IDs at the entrance, and metal detectors had been installed for the occasion. Sarah wore the dress that had been provided, carrying a small clutch that contained nothing suspicious. Her real equipment remained hidden in her hotel room. You look nice, Amadou commented as they entered. He wore a traditional Burkinabe outfit that suited him well. Thank you, Sarah replied. You clean up pretty well yourself. Inside, about 100 guests mingled, drinking champagne and sampling hors d'oeuvres. Sarah recognized various officials from her briefing files, as well as several expatriates who likely represented businesses or other NGOs. Let me introduce you to some people, Amadou offered, guiding her through the crowd. They spoke with health ministry officials, local business leaders, and other NGO workers. Sarah played her role perfectly, knowledgeable about medical supply logistics but not overly informed about political matters. Miss Miller, a deep voice said from behind her. Sarah turned to find herself face to face with the tall man who had stood behind Traoré during the speech. "I am Colonel Pascal Ouedraogo, Chief of Military Intelligence." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Pleased to meet you, Colonel." "Captain Traoré mentioned you were in attendance," Ouedraogo continued. "He's interested in the work of Global Health Initiative." "We're grateful for the government's support of our programs," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Perhaps you would like to meet the captain?" the colonel suggested. "He's speaking with the Russian delegation at the moment but asked me to bring you over when they finish." This was both an opportunity and a danger. Meeting Traoré could provide valuable intelligence, but it also meant facing a man who had openly spoken about foreign spies just hours earlier. "Of course," Sarah said. "It would be an honor." As they waited, Colonel Ouedraogo engaged her in seemingly casual conversation. "You've worked in other African countries, I understand?" "Yes, Mali and Niger most recently," Sarah confirmed, sticking to her cover story. "Interesting choices. Both countries have also chosen to partner with Russia rather than their former colonial masters." "I go where the health needs are greatest," Sarah replied. "And how do you find Burkina Faso compared to those countries?" "Each country has its unique challenges," Sarah said carefully. "But I've been impressed by the organization of your healthcare system, despite limited resources." The colonel nodded. "Captain Traoré has made healthcare a priority, along with security. The two are connected. People cannot access healthcare when terrorists control the countryside." "That makes sense," Sarah agreed. "Which is why Operation Desert Lion is so important," Ouedraogo continued, watching her face closely. "The joint exercises will help us secure the eastern regions where terrorists have been most active." "I heard the captain mention it in his speech," Sarah said, keeping her tone casual. "Is that information public?" "The operation itself is not secret, though specific details are classified, of course," the colonel replied. "The Russians have provided equipment our army never had access to before: attack helicopters, drone technology, advanced communication systems." Sarah knew he was feeding her information deliberately, but why? Was it accurate intelligence they wanted her to report, or misinformation to mislead her handlers? "Captain Traoré is available now," Ouedraogo said, gesturing toward the far side of the room. "Shall we?" Sarah followed the colonel through the crowd until they reached a small group. At the center stood Ibrahim Traoré, shorter in person than he had appeared on stage, but with an unmistakable presence. He wore a simple military uniform with no decorations except his rank insignia. "Captain, may I present Sarah Miller from the Global Health Initiative," Ouedraogo announced. Traoré turned to her with an intense gaze that seemed to look right through her cover. "Miss Miller. Welcome to Burkina Faso." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah replied, extending her hand. "Your country has been very welcoming." Traoré shook her hand firmly. "I understand you specialize in logistics for medical supplies?" "Yes, ensuring that medications and equipment reach remote areas efficiently." "A noble cause," Traoré nodded. "Though I wonder why an American with your qualifications would choose our small country for your work." There was something in his tone that put Sarah on high alert. Did he know something, or was he fishing for information? "Every country deserves access to quality healthcare," Sarah replied. "And I go where my organization sends me." "Indeed," Traoré said with a slight smile. "And who sends your organization, I wonder?" Before Sarah could respond, Traoré continued. "You'll have to excuse me. Duty calls. But I hope you enjoy your stay in Burkina Faso, Miss Miller, for however long it lasts." With that cryptic statement, he moved away, leaving Sarah with Colonel Ouedraogo. "The captain is very busy," the colonel said. "But he wanted to meet you personally." "I appreciate that," Sarah replied, trying to interpret Traoré's parting words. Was it a threat? "Enjoy the rest of your evening," Ouedraogo said. "And be careful on your way back to the hotel. The streets are not always safe at night." As the colonel walked away, Sarah rejoined Amadou, who had been watching from a distance. "You made quite an impression," Amadou observed. "It's not often that Captain Traoré speaks personally with NGO workers." "I guess I was lucky," Sarah said lightly. "Or perhaps you're more interesting than the average logistics coordinator," Amadou suggested. Sarah looked at him sharply. Was Amadou part of the trap they seemed to be setting for her? "I should hope not," she replied. "In my line of work, being boring is an asset. Exciting logistics usually means something has gone wrong." Amadou laughed, but his eyes remained serious. "We should go. We have an early start tomorrow." As they left the reception, Sarah noticed the black SUV waiting outside. It made no attempt to hide its presence now. Back in her hotel room, Sarah faced a dilemma. Should she report the information about Russian equipment mentioned by Ouedraogo, knowing it might be deliberately planted? Or should she abort the mission, sensing that her cover might be compromised? She decided to send a minimal report, noting the unusual attention from Traoré and Ouedraogo but not including the specifics about Russian equipment. She would wait for instructions before her next move. The response came quickly: continue mission. Information critical. Extraction team on standby if needed. Sarah turned off her equipment and tried to sleep, but Traoré's words kept echoing in her mind, for however long it lasts. The next morning, Sarah and Amadou visited the local clinic as planned. Sarah focused on her cover job, inspecting supply chains and storage facilities, making legitimate recommendations for improvements. You seem distracted today, Amadou observed as they drove back to the hotel. Just thinking about logistics problems, Sarah replied. Some of the medications aren't being stored at the right temperature. Amadou nodded but didn't seem convinced. There's been a change of plans. We need to visit a clinic near Didougou tomorrow. It's about 3 hours north of here. Sarah checked her mental map of Burkina Faso. Didougou was close to the border with Mali, a sensitive area with known terrorist activity. It was also far from any major city or potential extraction point if things went wrong. Is it safe? She asked, genuinely concerned. The military cleared the area last month, Amadou assured her. And we'll have an escort. An escort meant they would be watched the entire time. But refusing would raise suspicion. All right, Sarah agreed. What time do we leave? Early. 5 am, Amadou said. The roads are better in the morning before the heat builds up. That evening, Sarah sent a brief encrypted message to her handlers. Moving to Didougou tomorrow. Possible trap. Need satellite coverage. The response was delayed, which worried her. When it finally came, it was brief. Understood. Maintain cover. Extraction code, Blue Horizon, if needed. Sarah deleted the message and prepared for bed, checking that her emergency beacon was working and hidden in her shoe. She had a bad feeling about tomorrow's trip. At 4:45 a.m., Sarah met Amadou in the hotel lobby. A military jeep waited outside, along with their Global Health Initiative vehicle. For security, Amadou explained, nodding toward the soldiers. The area still has some risks. The convoy set off as dawn broke over the savannah. Sarah noticed they were taking a route different from what was marked on her maps. This isn't the main road to Didougou, she commented. There was a bridge washed out last week, Amadou explained. This is a detour. Sarah didn't believe him, but she had no choice but to play along. The detour took them through increasingly remote areas, with villages becoming scarcer. After 2 hours of driving, they turned onto a dirt track that led toward a compound surrounded by a high fence. It didn't look like any clinic Sarah had seen before. What is this place? She asked, tension evident in her voice. A military facility, Amadou replied, dropping all pretense. Captain Traoré wants to continue your conversation from last night. The jeep stopped inside the compound. Armed soldiers surrounded their vehicle. Please don't do anything foolish, Sarah, Amadou said quietly. They just want to talk. Sarah knew she was in serious trouble. Her cover was blown. The question was, how much did they know and what did they plan to do with her? She was escorted into a building and led to a sparsely furnished office. After waiting for 20 minutes, the door opened and Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked in, followed by Colonel Ouedraogo. Miss Miller, Traoré said, taking a seat across from her. Or should I say Agent Miller? That is your real title, isn't it? Sarah maintained her cover. I don't know what you're talking about. I work for Global Health Initiative. Traoré smiled slightly. Let's not waste time. We intercepted your transmission last night. While we couldn't decode the content, the fact that you're using encrypted satellite communications tells us everything we need to know. He placed a folder on the table and opened it to reveal photos of Sarah meeting with Martin at the cafe, close-ups of her camera pen, and printouts of her background that showed inconsistencies in her cover story. The real Sarah Miller died 5 years ago in a car accident in Virginia, Traoré said. Whoever you are, you're using her identity. Sarah knew the game was up, but training dictated she maintain her cover until it was completely impossible. There must be some mistake, she insisted. I can show you my credentials. Your credentials are excellent forgeries, Colonel Ouedraogo interjected. Your tradecraft is impressive. But we've been watching you since before you arrived. How? Sarah couldn't help asking. We have friends too, Traoré said simply. Friends who warn us when Western intelligence agencies plan operations in our country. Sarah realized there must be a leak somewhere in her organization, someone who had tipped off Burkina Faso about her mission before she even arrived. What do you want from me? Sarah asked, changing tactics. The truth, Traoré replied. Why are you really here? What is your government so interested in learning about Burkina Faso? Sarah remained silent. Your silence only confirms our suspicions, Traoré continued. You came pretending to help Africa, but your real mission was to spy on our military cooperation with Russia and undermine our sovereignty. I'm not here to undermine anything, Sarah finally said. Then why are you here? To ensure medical supplies reach rural clinics. Traoré's voice dripped with sarcasm. We've had enough of Western hypocrisy. Centuries of colonization, followed by decades of economic control, and now espionage under the guise of humanitarian aid. Sarah had no good answer. From his perspective, Traoré wasn't wrong. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Traoré replied. Cooperate, tell us what your agency knows and what they want to know, and you'll be deported quietly. Refuse, and you'll be presented to the world as evidence of Western interference in African affairs. It was a lose-lose situation for Sarah. If she cooperated, she'd be betraying her country. If she refused, she'd become a propaganda tool and likely face years in a Burkinabe prison. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow morning, Traoré stood up. In the meantime you'll be our guest here. As Traoré and Ouedraogo left, a guard escorted Sarah to a small room with a bed, desk and bathroom. It wasn't a cell exactly, but the door locked from the outside. Sarah sat on the bed, considering her options. Her emergency beacon was still hidden in her shoe, but activating it would only work if there was an extraction team nearby, unlikely given their remote location. As darkness fell, Sarah heard footsteps approaching her door. The lock turned and Amadou entered, carrying a tray of food. You should eat, he said, placing the tray on the desk. Sarah looked at him with contempt. Was any of it real? Or were you assigned to watch me from the beginning? Amadou sighed. I really do work for Global Health Initiative. But I also serve my country. When intelligence asked me to keep an eye on you, I agreed. So you're a patriot who spies on health workers, Sarah said bitterly. And you're a spy who pretends to be a health worker, Amadou countered. Which is worse? Sarah had no answer for that. Captain Traoré is not what your government thinks, Amadou continued. He's trying to free our country from foreign control, both Western and Russian. He plays both sides to get what our people need. If that's true, why partner with Russia at all? Sarah asked. Because when we kicked out the French, we needed military support from somewhere, Amadou explained. Russia offered better terms. No political conditions attached to their aid. There are always conditions, Sarah said. Perhaps. But at least they don't pretend to be our saviors while taking our resources. Amadou moved toward the door. Think carefully about your next move. Captain Traoré keeps his word. Cooperate and you'll go home. After Amadou left, Sarah weighed her options. There was no good way out of this situation. In the darkness of her room, she made her decision. She removed the emergency beacon from her shoe and activated it. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't betray her country. Sarah woke to the sound of her door being unlocked. Sunlight streamed through the small window. She had managed a few hours of fitful sleep, constantly alert for any sign that her beacon had been received. Colonel Ouedraogo entered the room. The captain will see you now. Sarah followed him down a corridor to the same office as yesterday. This time, Captain Traoré stood looking out a window, hands clasped behind his back. Have you considered my offer? Traoré asked without turning around. I have, Sarah replied. But I'm not a spy. I can't give you information I don't have. Traoré turned to face her. Still maintaining your cover? Even now? It's not a cover, Sarah insisted, knowing it was futile but following protocol to the end. Traoré sighed and picked up a device from his desk. He pressed a button and Sarah heard her own voice. Moving to Didougou tomorrow. Possible trap. Need satellite coverage. Then the response, understood. Maintain cover. Extraction code, Blue Horizon, if needed. Sarah's blood ran cold. They had intercepted her communications completely. We have technology too, Traoré said, setting down the device. Your emergency beacon was also detected last night. Unfortunately for you, there won't be any extraction team. Sarah's last hope vanished. She decided to change tactics. All right, she said. You've caught me. What exactly do you want to know? Now we're being honest, Traoré nodded in approval. I want to know why your government is so interested in our relationship with Russia. It's not just Russia, Sarah replied. It's the pattern of Russian influence expanding across the Sahel while pushing out Western allies. Western allies, or Western controllers? Traoré countered. France controlled our economy, our military, Our politics for decades after independence. Was that alliance or just colonialism with a different name? Sarah had no good answer. Her briefings had focused on Russian military presence, not the complex history of Franco-African relations. I'm just an intelligence officer, she said. I gather information. I don't make policy. A convenient excuse, Traoré said coldly. Everyone in your system claims they're just doing their job, following orders. Yet together you maintain an empire that continues to exploit Africa. He placed a map on the table. Do you know what this shows? French and American military bases across Africa. Dozens of them surrounding countries like ours. And you worry about our small partnership with Russia? Sarah looked at the map. She knew about most of the bases, but seeing them all marked together was admittedly striking. Those bases help fight terrorism, she argued. Do they? Or do they ensure Western access to our resources? Traoré leaned forward. The terrorists gained strength after NATO destroyed Libya. Your intervention created the chaos that spread across the Sahel. Again, Sarah had no good counter-argument. Her job had never required her to justify American foreign policy, only to execute it. What will happen to me? She finally asked. That was going to depend on your cooperation, Traoré replied. But circumstances have changed overnight. He nodded to Colonel Ouedraogo, who turned on a television mounted on the wall. It showed an international news broadcast reporting on an attempted coup in Ouagadougou. According to the report, the coup had failed, but fighting continued in some parts of the capital. Your government's work? Traoré asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I know nothing about this, Sarah said truthfully, shocked by the news. Perhaps. Or perhaps your mission was to gather intelligence while others prepared more direct action, Traoré suggested. Either way, your presence here is now a political asset. The American spy captured while coup plotters attacked the capital, it writes itself, doesn't it? Sarah realized her situation had deteriorated from bad to catastrophic. If Traoré linked her to the coup attempt, she would never go home. I had nothing to do with any coup, she insisted. My mission was strictly intelligence gathering. Spying, Traoré corrected. Let's call it what it is. Fine. Spying, Sarah conceded. But not plotting coups. The distinction may not matter anymore, Traoré said. The people will want someone to blame for the violence in Ouagadougou. A Western spy makes a perfect scapegoat. Sarah felt desperation rising. You know that's not